and became this incredible writing team for Superman, they were really just continuing from where Byrne left off, still making changes, but not through the introduction of some crisis reality altering event. So in 1986, not only was Superman's origin overhauled, but so too was Lex Luthor's, and in place of the criminal scientific genius who was constantly breaking out of jail, robbing banks so he could get money to build a machine that would destroy Superman once and for all, only to fail epically and get sent back to jail at the end of the issue, we got a very different looking Lex Luthor. He was, I would say, significantly older than Superman. I'd say a good 15, if not 20 years older than the Man of Steel. He wasn't short, but I'd say that he wasn't quite as tall as his pre-crisis incarnation. He wasn't completely bald in the Man of Steel 6-issue mini, which revamped the whole Superman origin. He was bald on top, but he was still trying to grow what remaining red hair he had left long. But by the time issue 1 of Superman Volume 2 came around, he was completely bald. This Lex Luthor was not a scientific genius. Rather, he was a very shrewd, skilled, and rich businessman. And over the years, there will be explanations as to how he came into acquiring his wealth. But the important thing at the start of the post-crisis era was that Lex Luthor and his LexCorp were at the heart of the Metropolis economy. His corporation basically drove Metropolis's economy. And yes, LexCorp did have a very strong research and development scientific wing, but it appeared that it wasn't Luthor who was doing all the handiwork. Rather, he was hiring people to do all of his handiwork. As it would turn out, this was actually quite brilliant, because if Superman or the authorities were to find that LexCorp was up to no good, he could say, well, it's just one or more of my employees who have gone a little too far, or maybe they're pushing the bounds, but basically, you can't touch me, you can't get me for any of this. Something else which stood out quite prominently about Lex Luthor was that he was not a particularly handsome or strapping man. Depending on who was visually depicting him, he was stocky or rather rotund. He still had very well-cut suits to try to cover up his girth, but it led to a lot of people saying, well, this is Byrne turning Lex Luthor into DC's Kingpin, and that's not right. Marvel's Kingpin is a very large man, but he's actually quite fit. He's got more of a sumo wrestler's build, but he's not all just useless fat and girth. In the case of the post-crisis Lex Luthor, though, he was a man who lived in excess. He certainly ate many a good steak. One could surmise he liked to drink the different spirits and smoke. And, he was at the top of the food chain. He had a team of doctors and advisors who could just make sure that his heart kept on ticking properly, and after that he didn't have to worry so much about his looks. The big thing was that he could use his money and his vast resources at LexCorp to make himself appear quite powerful and attractive. The reason why the post-crisis Lex Luthor hated Superman so much wasn't because of years ago in Smallville, Superboy attempting to save Lex from a burning laboratory by using his super breath, which caused a number of chemicals to splash over Luthor's head, making him bald. Rather, in the Man of Steel miniseries, Superman had embarrassed Lex Luthor when Luthor attempted to get Superman on his payroll by staging a mock siege on board his yacht. And when the mayor of Metropolis realized that this was all a ruse, he deputized Superman. Very important there, so that the post-crisis Superman would not be a vigilante, he would be a recognized law enforcement agent. The mayor deputized Superman and ordered him to take Lex Luthor to jail. And so it was that event, which happened in a full public eye, which caused Luthor to be so hateful towards the Man of Steel. It also said quite a lot about Lex Luthor's ego, that he did a fair amount of work to find out where exactly Superman came from. And when a member of his team collected a lot of evidence, including that scrapbook that was kept by Martha Kent for years, when she presented the unfailing evidence that Superman was in reality Clark Kent, Luthor fired her on the spot and said, "You are ridiculous. How could you possibly suggest that an alien with the power of a god would choose to spend the better part of his day masquerading as a mortal being?" That was really smart, because that got rid of the whole pre-crisis conceit about Lex Luthor trying to find out Superman's secret identity. Luthor simply didn't see Superman as having a secret ID. So, if this Lex Luthor was not particularly strong, if he didn't present his own independent scientific genius, if he wasn't building green and purple battle suits laced with kryptonite weapons in order to take on the Man of Steel in combat, how is it that Lex Luthor was able to keep Superman at bay? Well, one of the big changes in the post-crisis era, as introduced by Byrne, was that there was only one piece of kryptonite which came to Earth. It was attached to the star drive which brought Superman's birthing matrix to Earth. And so while that piece of kryptonite originally served as Mattel's heart, Lex Luthor would later take it, repurpose it, and have a kryptonite ring fashioned for him. And so that was how Luthor was able to keep himself at bay. He had to deal with the fact that the Man of Steel was still there, and he was now the golden child of Metropolis. But Luthor felt that he could still continue things unfettered, because all he had to do if the Man of Steel came nearby was to flash that kryptonite ring, and that would keep Superman away. But of course, in the end, that backfired for Lex Luthor, as he started feeling pain in his right hand. It was on his right hand that he wore that ring 24/7. And the pain got so bad that his long-suffering doctor, Gretchen Kelly, revealed to him that wearing that kryptonite ring for so long had given him radiation poisoning. Another change of post-crisis era. Kryptonite would not kill a human nearly so quickly as it would kill a Kryptonian, but it made sense that kryptonite came from Earth, came from space, and on its way to Earth, it encountered all sorts of material in space, and so when it came to Earth's surface, it was radioactive, and so it would create long-term adverse health side effects for whoever came into contact with kryptonite. And I like that Byrne didn't say that it was cancer that Luthor had as a result of wearing the ring. I think that would have looked very callous on DC's part if they came out giving a message that a horrendous real-world disease such as cancer, is caused by kryptonite. I'm glad that they kept it simple and just said it's radiation poisoning, but Luthor paid a terrible cost for wearing that ring. He had to have his right hand amputated, and that fueled his rage, his hatred for Superman even more. Yes, he had a pretty state-of-the-art bionic hand created for him. He would cover it up with a glove because of his raging, egotistical nature. But to now lose a vital appendage due to his adversity with Superman, this was too much. And now, that might have seemed pretty extreme, taking such an iconic character as Lex Luthor and taking away his right hand. But it didn't end there. Well, actually it did for John Byrne, because at around this point he was making yet another exit from DC Comics. He wasn't pleased with the fact that, in his mind, DC was not properly promoting his reinterpretation of Superman. He looked at Superman in other media, he looked at Superman merchandise, and he saw the Jose Luis Garcia Lopez art and said, so really I've put in 2 years worth of blood, sweat, and tears, and my version of Superman isn't getting proper due in the public eye? Well, I mean, that's counterproductive to begin with. That goes against what DC had planned in the first place. So I'm out of here. So exit John Byrne and enter the team of Roger Stern, Dan Jurgens, and Jerry Ordway. And later writers like Louise Simonson and Carl Kessel would come on board. And the Superman continuity during this time period would continue to be so tight. It really led the way in DC Comics at that time. So, like I suggested before, the crew of Stern, Jurgens, and all, they clearly wanted to do something different with Lex Luthor. But they didn't just want to say, Mechanique, the Crisis-era robot, has come back, and she's released another wave of chronal energy, which is going to erase everything that John Byrne did and restore the pre-Crisis versions of Superman and Lex Luthor. Rather, what they did with Lex Luthor was very organic. They chose to start an ongoing arc where Lex Luthor learned that the radiation poisoning went beyond his lost hand. It was actually spreading throughout his body. And this was horrible for such an egotistical person as Lex Luthor. And he actually had nightmares about this. In one particular sequence, which was drawn so well by Bob McLeod, Death, or the Grim Reaper, barged into Lex Luthor's penthouse office and said, "I'm here for you, Luthor." And as Luthor was fighting back, Death's hood was pulled back to reveal that Death was Superman, looking very much like the immediate post or pre-crisis Ultraman of Earth 3. And so dreams like this horrified Luthor. Superman would also have similar nightmares in which he was unable to stop Lex Luthor from dying. Luthor tried his best, of course, to keep his impending death a secret, but he did start to form a bucket list of sorts. And at the top of his bucket list was to be the pilot on the launch of a new experimental LexCorp jet. And even though a very fine pilot had been chosen for the flight, at the press conference which would lead into the launching of the jet, there appeared Lex Luthor in full flight gear, patted the pilot on the shoulder, said, "There, son, good on you. But this is something